உள்ளதலதுள்ள உணர் உள்ளதோ உள்ள பொருள் உள்ளல் அற உள்ளத்தே உள்ளதாம் உள்ளம் எனும் உள்ள பொருள் உள்ளல் எவன் உள்ளத்தே உள்ளபடி உள்ளதே உள்ளல் உணர்வாயே. Namo Ramana. It is with Bhagavan's immense grace that we are meditating on this holy work, as Akka reminded us on this holy day of Vijayadashami. We have meditated through the verses from Mangala Shlokas, the two Mangala Shlokas from verse 1 to verse 24. Today we are taking up verse number 25 to bring it to context. We are still in Viveka segment, but Viveka about the root problem. The root problem, the ego, is covered in 23, 24, 25, 26, these verses. நான் என்றித்தேகம் நவிலாது உறக்கத்து நான் என்றென்றாரும் நவில்வதில்லை நான் ஒன்றெழுந்த பின் எல்லாம் எழும் இந்த நானெங்கெழும் என்ற நுண்மதியால் எண் என் ஜடவுடல் நான் என்னாது சச்சித்து உதியாது உடலளவா நான் ஒன்றுதிக்கும் இடையில் இது சிஜடக்கிரத்தி பந்தம் ஜீவன் நுட்பமை அகந்தை இச்சமுச்சாரம் manam end. So whatever the problems that we had felt to be multifarious, Bhagavan bundles them all up and reduces them to the root problem as chit jada granthi, the knot between the pure consciousness and the inert body. That is the root problem. Is whatever problem may be, don't worry about what problem it is. Whatever may be the problem, if you ask for whom is this problem, you have done something about it already. For whom is this problem? Put the light on the Moola Granthi, then be assured that not only have we done something about it, we have done the best about it. That is what Bhagavan says in the previous verse, that this is the essence of all the manifested problems. Now, Bhagavan is going to delineate how this problem comes about and what is the route to dissolve it. To dissolve it means dissolve the whole area of problems. The whole area where we feel we are trapped, a consciousness that is limited, that is born into certain kinds of limitations, if not suffering, and trying to meander its way through this complex maze and find a way to real happiness, real consciousness and real existence, which is all one, says Bhagavan, as the self. This verse, it delineates the problem and indicates the route that we have to take in verses 27, 28, 29 to unravel this chit jada giranti. So let us get into the verse. Urupatri undam, urupatri nirkum, urupatri undu miga vongum, uruvittu urupatrum, தேடினால் ஓட்டம் பிடிக்கும் உருவற்ற பேய் அகந்தை ஓர் உருப்பற்றி உண்டாம் உருப்பற்றி நிற்கும் உருப்பற்றி உண்டு மிக ஓங்கும் உருவிட்டு உருப்பற்றும் தேடினால் ஓட்டம் பிடிக்கும் உருவற்ற பேய் அகந்தை ஓர். So what we are going to do is we'll try to go through the meaning quickly, then see how difficult it is to arrive at the solution from the outer world, but how the modern science is trying to do that, and how in a simple but supremely direct manner Bhagavan unravels the knot. We will try and see that. So quickly into the meaning of the verse. Urupatri undam. Holding on to a form only, this chit jada granthi arises. This root problem called ego, the chit jada granthi, it arises only holding on to a form. We'll have to directly jump to the last part of that. Uruvatra peya handai vor. Bhagavan declares that the ego by itself does not have a form. It does not have a form by itself. It does not have a light by itself. It does not have a form by itself, but still somehow it appears. It does not have a form by itself. Uruvatra peya handai vor. Therefore, it has to hold on to some other uru and then only it can arise. The clarification for that we will see is how in deep sleep what happens to the ego. But essentially, the ego is not having a form of its own. Uruvatra peya handai. Urupatri undam. As it does not have a form of itself, it rises holding on to a form. Urupatri undam, urupatri nirkum. As it exists, as it survives only holding on to a form. Take away the form, it loses its form and goes back to its root. Urupatri nirkum. Urupatri undu miga vongum. It consumes, holds, consumes forms and fattens itself and grows and raises up. The more it consumes forms, the more it has the possibility of getting triggered into raising up. Urupatri undu miga vongum. Uruvittu urupatrum. When the form that it is holding has reached its mortality, the time that it has to dissolve into its component parts, when the form that the ego is holding has now reached a point in time where Kala has decided that this cannot stay together, it has to go back to its elements, then the ego will hold on to another form and then only leave this form. Uruvittu urupatrum. தேடினால் ஓட்டம் பிடிக்கும். But the moment a search is established as to what is this, who am I, then it vanishes or it is dismantled, it is destroyed, whatever word you want to use. தேடினால் ஓட்டம் பிடிக்கும் uruvatra peya handai. We have used the uruvatra peya handai in the beginning itself. So let us bring it all together so that we can go into the two separate parts that we want to discuss this as. The summation is that by itself this chit jada giranti, which is the root of all problems, does not have a form of its own. It rises up holding on to a form. It exists holding on to a form, and consuming many forms in subtle and gross and causal ways, it grows, it fattens, and it rises up. But the moment a search is established as to what is this, essentially, what is this Chitjada Giranti, and if the ray of attention doesn't go beyond the products of this Chitjada Granthi, but on the Chitjada Granthi itself, then it vanishes. The knot is unraveled and the ego is destroyed or dismantled. That is the verse that we have. It actually delineates the whole process of the problem. Bhagavan had taken a bigger canvas in the previous verse, that this Chitjada Giranti is all those Jivan, Nutpamai, Ahande, Ichamasaram, Manam, all those things are only this Chitjada Granthi. Now the entire attention is now put on this problem. How is this problem coming about? Urupatri Undan. How is this problem sustaining itself? Urupatri Nirkum. How is this problem growing? Urupatri Undu Miha Wongum. Uruvittu Urupatrum. But suppose one of the forms that it is holding comes upon its end, has to end. Then what it will do? It will carefully take another form and then only leave this form. But the moment a search is established, then this knot, this root Granthi, this knot that is behind all the knots, that is unraveled. And the whole problem, the whole tree of samsara gets dissolved into the self. That is the verse that we have. Let us see how modern science is handling this situation. They are just now coming. It is a multidisciplinary approach that is required. They are now bringing many branches of humanities and science together to come to these conclusions. There are some presentations that are available. The main heading under which they discuss this is the delusion of the self, the illusoriness of the ego. But the approach from the outside is difficult, and this was one of the topics that was given to me by Akka in one of the Tamil satsangs that we had earlier on the online, where I was to take up the Atma Vidya Sankirtanam of Bhagavan for discussion. Aye Ati Sulabham. Anma Vidya Aye Ati Sulabham. Muruganar starts off that verse by saying Atma Vidya is so easy, but then he leaves it to Bhagavan to complete. And in one of the verses, Bhagavan says, Tannai Aridal Indri, Pinnai Edarigil En, Tannai Arindidil, Pin Ennai Ulladu Ariya. Without knowing the self, what is the use of knowing anything? And after the self-knowledge has been merged in, what is left to know? This is the import of that line. And you will recall that that is the same import of one of the verses we had seen, verse number 20 in Ulladu Narpadu. Kaanum Thanai Vittu, Thaan Kadavulai Kaanal, Kaanum Manomayamam Kaatshi Thanai, Kaanum Thanai Vittu, Thaan Kadavulai Kaanal, Kaanum Manomayamam Kaatshi Thanai, Kaanum Avan, Thaan Kadavul Kandanam, Than Mudalai, Thaan Mudal Poi, Thaan Kadavul Andri Iladal. To see anything without knowing the seer is merely getting occupied with the mental objects. And only that one is said to see the truth or see God, who has inquired into this ego, Kanum Tanmudalai, Tan Mudal Poi, putting the attention on that Chijjada Granthi, and that Mudal, the Ahankara, vanishes. Then what is that Tan left? That Tan left alone can be God, because it is transcendental. It transcends everything. Everything seen is transcended. Therefore, it is Kadavul. Kadavul is transcendental. Kadanda Nirpavar Kadavul. Since this Tan is transcendental, that is what is given as instruction to Sivaprakasham Pillai too, that when Sivaprakasham Pillai asks if the gross body made of the Sapta Dhatus, the Karmendriyas, the Jnanendriyas, the Panchapranas, the Manas, and the ignorance of sleep in which all vasanas are there. If I am not any of this, then who am I? Bhagavan says, you are that arivu, that consciousness, which has negated all these as not I, and is standing alone, self-luminously, independent of any dependence on anything else. That is the Satchitananda, the Rupa or the Swarupa of that Tanittu Nirkum Arivu. Tanittu Nirkum Ariveni. That Tanittu Nirkum Arivu is the self. But what the scientists do, they are try to come to this truth by inquiring into the Kanam Ulaga. That is what I had taken up in that Atma Vidya Sankirtanam, because the same Atma Vidya is discussed as Mettakadinam. Aye Mettakadinam by Nandanar. Aye Mettakadinam Unadadimai, and he goes ahead, Muppalum Tan Kadam Appale Nindravark. Only those who have transcended the waking, dream, and deep sleep states by actually understanding the outside world and crossing that, Muppalum Tan Kadam Appale Nindravark. Only for such ones the Atma Jnana comes. So it is so difficult when we look at it in terms of outside world. So many things have to be crossed. And in that discussion, we could come to the point that how Bhagavan has made it easy or direct by asking us to make the journey inward. And we have in the earlier discussions that outside is the three-dimensional sensory perception. Therefore, all higher dimensions must lie inside us for journeying. That's what Bhagavan also teaches. So in that particular talk to the Tamil Satsang, we could bring it out that how to aggregate the outside objects, aggregate all the individual selves into one self, how it is so difficult. Whereas the moment you start going inward, as we will see a little bit later, the aggregation, seeing that everything is one, becomes a process of holding the I and letting go of the non-self. But how the scientists are doing that difficult job, Muppadaitan Kadakkarade, how to cross the waking state, then come to dream and deep sleep. Let us see what they do. And we see scientists like, I have given 2-3 videos earlier, everything is connected. What they do is that they study the outside world and see how everything is connected. That one of the scientists says that the moment a body loses its life, then all the oxygen in it, all the atoms in it merges with the world, and that oxygen could be taken in by somebody in Australia, from an oxygen from a body here. In fact, that's happening all around. So he says every breath we take is a simultaneous taking in of the knowledge of all living beings. In fact, it can be expanded to say all plants also. If you include that, it is the plants who are originating the oxygen in one sense through the photosynthesis process or the process that they have, and they absorb carbon dioxide and leave out oxygen, and we do exactly the opposite. And one of the scientists say they are our outside lungs. So you can see what huge lungs we have and how we fill it up with cigarette smoke and all kinds of smoke. How we fill up our outside lungs without knowing that we are doing that. But they study all this, they study all that, and they come to the point that the individual ego is a delusion, that we are a separate ego is indeed an illusion which is causing difficulties, which is causing harm, is what they find. And these are all bhaktas. According to Bhagavan, in talk 26 or 27, he says that those who love the world, those who love the universe and want to protect the whole of living beings, there is a bhakti marga. It is a bhakti of living beings in general. So their love will eventually lead them to self, is what Bhagavan says in the talks. But that's quite a long route, and the assimilating of it requires a particular type of special knowledge, which we may be able to understand or we may not be. Like in the evening walk, we were discussing how the scientist comes up to the common ego. He says, when Murali sir and I, we are discussing, where does Murali sir end and where does Nandakumar begin? There is no line. His knowledge about the route in Belur, where I had traveled earlier, we were discussing that where that particular place where the road takes off from Hassan to Belur, what was that? That is called Tanirala. The moment he said Tanirala, I could recollect. Like, so his inputs in words are part of me, and my inputs to him from words are part of him. So where does his self end and where does myself begin, or vice versa? Similar is the input from books, people, other things, and from plants, of course, from insects. When we are careless about the insects, the scientist says we are partly destroying part of us, because it is all connected. When we are changing the woodlands into just crop growing areas, he says we are destroying all that habitat of the butterflies and other insects. And he says we are being casual to part of us. It is part of us. So that is how they are trying to cobble up, to stitch up. And it is not, they have not given up so easily. Like the Korean scientist whom I had referred to, he comes up to consciousness. He finally ends up in that talk that in the consciousness, we may be 4 types of people that are present in the consciousness, but each of us is sharing information with the other. And the key point where he leaves us in this integration of the self is that he leaves in that video, I think it is Tom Chi, Tom Chi's video. There are a few scientists who are all going in that direction now, that the self is one. But they are restricting it to the waking state as far as the earlier scientist is concerned. But Tom Chi brings it to deep sleep a little bit, because he goes into subconscious. He says that in the subconscious, we all exchange information with each other. And the key point, he says, is that nobody in the subconscious should be treated as irrelevant. Like somebody might have caused trouble, not knowing who they are. They might have caused trouble to the people around, all around, and finally they might even ended up committing suicide. But even such a person, we should not feel that they have no place, they have no validity of existence, because from their existence, from their struggles, the rest of us being connected to them, we understand. So where do the scientists come? The scientists come in integrating that all this is in me. All this is in me is the Visishtadvaita level, where we come up to the point that all of this are parts of me, are within me. Then Bhagavan takes, if they are in me, as Akka would say in reference to dream, can there be anything other than I? Can it be anything other? If they are all in me, if I am going to say none of the parts of this consciousness is not worthy of existence, everything is worthy of existence, then I am including everything in the consciousness, though I don't know and delineate the parts. In the self, everything is there. But Bhagavan says, and I had reminded us quite long time back, that the dream experience shows that all the contents in the dream are me. Similar is this scientists arriving that all present in the subconscious, that shift they don't make, but it is essential for us to make and understand that though we may say there are contents in me, then we come to the next point that if they are all in me, they have to be me only. They have to be the I consciousness. And that is where Bhagavan comes. That is where Bhagavan makes this whole journey easy without the knowledge required to integrate that everything is connected. Where at any one point we may disagree. Bhagavan makes it easy by saying that, are there three selves in the waking, dream and deep sleep? No, there is only one. And in deep sleep, the Uru seems to be not there. And if one point, if it is not there, then that Uru is not its own. That is why Bhagavan says that it does not have a form of its own. The ego does not have a form of its own because in deep sleep it does not have. So let us come to what Bhagavan, how Bhagavan integrates the whole creation into the self. He says that Urupatri undam, Urupatri nirkum, Urupatri undumiga vongum, Uruvittu Urupatrum. Let us take that segment and see how Bhagavan combines all this difficult integration that the scientist makes. In a jiffy, he makes that. He says in the whole waking state arises only after the waking state I arises. The whole dream state arises only after the dream I arises. The whole deep sleep experience of non-objective existence, but we don't seem to be aware that we, as Brahmaji of Chinmaya Mission would say, we seem to be going inside the thought I do not know. And everything else joins us there in the I do not know. And then the moment the waking state comes, we seem to come out of that thought as I do not know, and then play in the area of waking. That is how the story is delineated. But how that whole story is delineated? Urupatri und. The whole story of waking arises after the ego rises and holds one body. The whole story of dreaming arises after the ego rises and identifies with one dream body. And the whole vanishing of the stories into the I do not know arises when the ego becomes tired and goes to sleep in the thought I do not know, and everything also joins it, as we are also I do not know consciousness only, like that. So if in one state it does not have form, then the form is not its own real nature. Tan Uruvatri, it does not have a form of its own. So Urupatri undi, it rises up holding on to this form called Nandakumar. Urupatri undam. Urupatri nirkum. The Uru that we see here need not necessarily be the gross alone, and usually it is not. It is a whole plethora of subtle bodies. Let us say somebody is pursuing from the second PU, they move into IIT and they want to do BTech. So Uru, the one subtle body which has now come to the graduating out of school, now is going into college for the degree, and that is the Uru it is going to hold. While trying to hold that degree aspiration, many other Urus will come. Many other aspirations will come. Array, should I devote so much time for this? Is that not important? Is this not? So you find in the first year, many of them drop out or many of them fail because they are not able to hold on to that new form. What is required of that new form, they are not able to hold on. Then they hold it on for 5 years and then they say, now we are IITians, IIT graduate. So, Urupatri, then from there on, the ego has that as part of them, that wherever they go, they are called as IITians, or IIT in the Bandidare, and they also feel, and they go ahead with that. Urupatri Undumiga Vongum, nothing, I am not putting that down or trying to glorify, but that is the process. Uruvittu Urupatrum. The Uruvittu Urupatrum is where Bhagavan comes in as experience for us because it involves the area of death. I have mentioned the Uruvittu Urupatrum in a relative area, but in a little more complex area of death, we can go to Bhagavan, we can read what Bhagavan says about Uruvittu Urupatrum from talk number 247. What is the state just before death? Bhagavan, when a person gasps for breath, it indicates that the person is unconscious of this body. Another body has been held and the person swings to and fro. While gasping, there is more violent gasp at intervals. The Perumucha or Dirga Swasa, they say, at intervals, and that indicates oscillation between the two bodies due to the present attachment not having been completely snapped. I noticed it in the case of my mother and of Palaniswami, says Bhagavan. So the necessity of the ego to go to another body is felt by Bhagavan, that the jiva of Palaniswami and Amma are trying to go to the new body. Bhagavan, the devotee, does the new body involved in this state represent the next reincarnation of the present person? Bhagavan, yes. While gasping, the person is in something like a dream. So the subtle area comes and envelops, and it is in that subtle that the transfer from gross to gross takes place. While gasping, the person is in something like a dream, not aware of the present environment. It must be remembered that Sri Bhagavan had been with his mother from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. until she passed away is the words used, but Kameshwarji would always remind us that it is absorbed. That as Bhagavan remains a devotee, that till Amma was absorbed in the self. He was all along holding her head with one hand and the other hand was on her bosom. What does it signify? He himself said later that there was a struggle between himself and his mother until her spirit reached the heart. So the struggle indicates that the jiva was ready to go to another body, but the dhyana, the tapas of Bhagavan, the current of this Purana absorbed that and took her to the heart. Bhagavan even explains this process like a scientist. Evidently, the soul passes through a series of subtle experiences, and Sri Bhagavan's touch generates a current which turns the soul back from its wanderings into the heart. And that's what he asks us to do in Atma Vicharam. When the thought wants to rise and take away the I, Bhagavan says that is only an Uru. And it is you who are giving it importance. You turn back and don't get carried away by that thought, but come back into the self. That is Bhagavan keeping a hand here and a hand here for us. That come back to the heart. Don't go with the thought. He says he's touching all of us like that all the time. Like what he kept physically for Amma. Evidently, the soul passes through a series of subtle experiences, and Shri Bhagavan, signifying that the spirit had escaped through the eyes, escaped through them, thereby indicating a higher rebirth, but not liberation. So it held on to another Uru, though may not be as gross as this. Having once noticed it with Palani Swami, Maharishi continued touching his mother for a few minutes longer, even after the signal of the soul passing into the heart, and thus ensured her liberation. This, the liberation of Amma, was confirmed by the look of perfect peace and composure on her features. So that is Uruvittu Urupatrum Tedinal Votam Pudik. What is the Tedidal? What Bhagavan did by keeping the hand here? Bhagavan says you do it yourself. You inquire into what is the nature of this Chijjada Granthi. Who am I? You put an attention on that and it will vanish. And just like Amma is absorbed ever in the cell, we will also be realizing the truth that the self alone is. For this, of course, the Mapillai Thodan story completes the discussion. The Mapillai Thodan story, I request Akka to tell us, because if it's not too much on my part to request her, because obviously she knows it better.
Sure.
So we can sit for Atma Vicharam for the next few minutes till 8 o'clock, when Akka can give us her perspective on this important verse. Namo Ramana. Namo Ramanaka.
Namo Ramana, sir. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. So we are on this very crucial verse in Ulladu Narpadu, where Bhagavan delineates the form of the ego after having told us in the previous verse that it is Chittara Granthi and it has its various synonyms called Nutpamai, Ahandai, Samsaram, Manam. And here also, as Nandakumarji told us at the very outset, he says, Uru Atra Pei Ahandai. So, what is this ego? It is formless, it has no form of its own, and therefore it can be called a pei. Because ghost, what is a ghost? A ghost is something whose form is not visible to us. Also, a ghost is something which is dead. Pei, this pei ahandai has no form of its own. Besides, by calling it pei, Bhagavan points out it's a ghost. A ghost is a form of something or a residue of something which is dead and gone, which is not alive here and now. So, first of all, the ego doesn't have form. Secondly, it's always a dead thing. That's why Bhagavan says, if one is thinking that the body is the I, he calls a person who thinks that a living corpse, he says. He uses a very strong expression. Sri A.R. Natarajan had pointed it out in one of his articles, where Bhagavan refers to people as living corpses. Again, there is an incident with Kanakamma, whose centenary we are now celebrating, reported by Kanakamma. Therein there are two people who come and ask for Bhagavan's opinion, whether they can have lunch without a purificatory bath after doing the obsequies of a dead body. And Bhagavan says, how does it matter? Because everyone is actually living, carrying on all the activities as a living corpse, practically that way. So the ego is something dead, because everything that comes to it is from the past. It's from what Bhagavan calls the dead past. In his verse in Ulladu Narpadu also, he says the past is gone, dead and gone. He's already told us that. So the ego is concerned or supported only by the dead past. So it's a pain. It's a dead thing. And it's got an apparent form which is not there at all. It is formless. But this ghost, this dead apparition appears holding on to possessing some other form. See, that's what we say, no? The ghosts and all, they take possession of people. They take possession of some form to satisfy their own desires. It's exactly what the ego does. It takes one form after another to satisfy its desires, because this formless thing cannot experience the world without a udal, without a form. This again Bhagavan has told us in Ulladu Narpadu in an earlier verse. He told us, no, without this body, how can you experience the world? So without a body, you cannot experience the world, you cannot have any experiences. So the ego latches on to the form, and thereby it appears to have an existence which it really does not have. But what is it that allows it to latch on to the form? It is the conscious element. Otherwise, the form is jada. The form cannot say anything. So this is the link. This is the chit jada granthi, the apparently non-existent ego, which comes into existence as a bridge or as a knot between the two, which consciousness and the body. This is its nature. And Bhagavan gives us the beautiful story which Nanda Kumarji has very sweetly asked me to tell, because it's a lovely story it is, of the Mappillai Thoran, the friend of the bridegroom, as it calls. This is the story refers to a wedding of long ago, where the bridegroom's party may arrive at the bride's village 1 week in advance, and the marriage functions would take place for a week. Even my mother would always very joyously narrate how her wedding took place for a whole week. So that is how marriages would take place in those days. So we can imagine a situation where the bridegroom's party is arriving by train, and imagine an Indian train in those days, and the bride's people are trying to arrive at the station, not necessarily exactly at their village, probably with a few bullock carts over there. And who can say exactly when the train is coming and when these people have come? And with all our Indian sense of time, probably there was some confusion that the train arrived before the bride's party arrived, and there was somebody there in the station who realized that this great event, this marriage is taking place because the bridegroom's party has come, they're getting down with all their things and all that. So this man took hold of this great opportunity and went and welcomed the bridegroom, the bridegroom's father. He could easily make out, you can always make out who these people are from their behavior. So he was a man of the world. He happily went and received them, welcomed them, come, come, come. In the meantime, the bride's people arrived, and he made himself close to the bride's people also. And then the wedding proceedings started, and day in and day out, the parties were quite happy with each other. But this middleman was making a lot of trouble. He would throw his weight around here and there. He would tell the bride's people that the bridegroom people were not happy. And he would tell the bridegroom's people that the bride's people were not happy. Or they are creating some nuisance, something or other. He was creating a lot of rift between the two parties, but they put up with it. Why did they put up with it, says Bhagavan? Because the bride's people thought he was a close relative of the bridegroom or a friend of the bridegroom. Relative he may not be, but close friend of the bridegroom. And the bridegroom's people thought he is a close friend or a relative of the bride's people. So this went on. And in all the melee of the marriage, nobody had any time to think about him. See, this is how our life is. We are so busy living for ourselves that we have no time to find out who we are. That is a great irony of our lives. So that is how it was in the wedding. But there came a day when they two, the father of the bride and the father of the groom, would get an occasion to sit together. And suddenly the father of the groom, this man, was busy throwing his weight as usual somewhere in the corner of the big hall, saying this, bring that, bring this, etc. The father of the groom asked the father of the bride, you have not introduced me to that relative of yours. And the father of the bride was astonished or shocked. And he said, sir, we thought he is related to you. We thought he's a close friend of the bridegroom. We never realized that he is not known to you. He is no friend of ours. He is no relative of ours. So they were pointing to him. They were looking at him. And they were obviously having a heated discussion, or a rather animated discussion. And being sensitive, this man knew. So what would he do? What would his action be? Asked Bhagavan. He automatically took to his heels. He knew that the inquiry about him has started. His reality would be known in no time, and that would be a catastrophic situation for him. Better to disappear from the scene. Thedinal ottam pidikum, says Bhagavan. If you search for it, it will run away. Bhagavan, of course, also gives another option. The other option, if you don't search, If you don't search, what happens, says Bhagavan? He gives a real life incident. A life incident from when he was a boy in Madurai. Then he says, in those days, thieves, this was an impostor, a kind of thief actually. And there was an actual thief who was coming in. A wedding was to take place in a very rich family, and a thief gave notice, I am going to come on such and such a day. All of you beware, take care. It was in those days the thieves took upon themselves the duty of announcing their arrival before coming. So they felt that was the right thing to do. Allow the enemy to be prepared. So do not harm an unarmed enemy. They announced it. And the thief came. The people were prepared. They had got a lot of police over there, including most of them were plain clothes policemen, so that nobody knows who is a policeman. If the thief knows such a person is a police, then he may be wary. So get them all as if they are normal dressed, normal clothes. They say mufti. So like that, they're all there. And what happens? The thief made good. How did he make good? With the booty. The robbery happened. And when somebody discovered that things were stolen, they started shouting, thief, thief, thief. Everybody was shouting thief. Nobody has seen the thief. Nobody knows who the thief is. Everyone is shouting thief, thief, thief and running helter-skelter. And the thief also shouted thief, thief, thief. So nobody recognized that the thief was a thief. The thief was taken to be one of the people searching for the thief. So Bhagavan says, this is the thief turned policeman. Because if this I is taking any form, what kinds of form? It takes some form. And what kind of form can it take? It is a Chit Jada Granthi, so it can take a form of related to the body, yes. But it can also pretend to take a form related to consciousness. It can say, I am pure consciousness, I am not the body. Good. But so long as it keeps itself alive saying this, Bhagavan says one cannot trust it 100%. One can only get over this completely through vichara, through self-inquiry. Who is thinking thus? Who is declaring that? Who says body is not I? Who says self alone is I? Who says I do not want anything in the world? Who says I want self-realization alone? Who is saying this? Who is the I? Because any statement made by the I keeps the Maapalai Thoran alive. It keeps the imposter alive. It gives reality to the imposter. So the key which Bhagavan is giving us over here is that one must search for the truth of this entity. And one must not allow it to hold on to any form. The moment it holds on to any form, it is going to be powerful. Omgum. It is going to be very powerful. The moment it is allowed to hold on to a form. And how does it hold on to a form? Through thought. That's why Bhagavan says, even as thought rises, cut it at its source. Inquire, even as it rises, cut it at its source, says Bhagavan. Inquire, ask for whom, and ask who am I, even as it rises. Because otherwise, urupatri undu migavongum. And it changes, it keeps on changing, flitting from form to form. Very difficult to trace it. So it has to be very alertly observed, even as it tries to hold on to a form, and then question. And if questioned, then it will have no alternative but to flee, because it has no locus standi of its own, it has no form of its own, and it cannot sustain itself when questioned. This is the beautiful Brahmastram which Bhagavan is giving us. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Om